so to speak. I don't know what you call it.
That's awesome.
Glass sanctuary. But you know what it's like to be one of the first women rabbis and how we changed the culture as female rabbis in the synagogue. But I just want to point out that I think it's very auspicious and significant that we're having this conversation on the day that we get the first woman vice president in our history. And it shows you how long it's taken. What is she, the 46th vice president? And she's the first woman. So we only took like 3,000 years for the first women to be rabbis. But let me just give a little background on our guests this morning. So Rabbi Ben-Naim began her work with our camps during the summer of 1995. And since 2000, as we know, she is the director of Jewish Life and Learning at our Brahman Elementary School on both of our campuses. And she oversees Judaic learning, Hebrew, Israel programming. She's so lucky. She goes to Israel every year. Are you going this year too?
No, but fortunately, I took last year's delegation before the pandemic hit. So we did have a 2020 delegation.
And Rabbi Ben-Naim began her rabbinate with Rabbi Fox as her direct supervisor. And their relationship became as mentor and mentee, and then I think friends after that. And she attributes much of her and the school's success to Rabbi Fox's vision, experience, and wisdom. Rabbi Karen Fox was ordained at HUCJR in New York in 1978. And you were the third woman rabbi? Fourth woman rabbi in America.
Right.
In the world?
Christina Jonas, we now say, was ordained in Berlin.
So in the world, fourth woman rabbi in the world. And she worked at the URJ for 5 years, and then came back to LA. And she started in 1985 at Wilshire Boulevard Temple as the camp director and rabbi, which was when Rabbi Fields was the senior rabbi. And he was her supervisor and mentor in many ways. And there were no women rabbis as mentors. However, Rabbi Fox wants us to know that her great aunt, Tanta Lata, Dr. Charlotte Schwarzenberger, was a psychologist, was her mentor. Rabbi Fox has been at Wilshire Boulevard Temple for over 25 years. She worked in the camps. She developed adult learning and support. She was a supervisor of educators. Of course, she did pulpit work, b'nai mitzvah, weddings, funerals, and pastoral counseling. And she's very proud that she's a mother, a shviger, is that the word?
Yeah.
Meaning a mother-in-law, now a grandma, a opa, right?
Omi, they call me.
Opa's grandfather. Omi of 4. She just had a new grandson, Mazel Tov. And she loves dark chocolate, black licorice, hiking, skiing, and biking. And I welcome you both. So, Elissa, why don't you kick off the discussion?
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Nanis. And really, I just want to start from a place of gratitude that it's been a while since the three of us have all been together. So really to take this opportunity to pause and just bask in this amazing feeling that there are so many of us connected to Wilshire with lots of amazing stories to tell, and really to sing the praises of the growth of a very special community. So Susan, thank you for asking all of the clergy to, as we push forward in this pandemic, to think about also how we got to where we are. So for me to think about how I stand on the shoulders of greatness is quite an amazing part of my week this week. So, and on this auspicious day. So thank you for that. And, Karen, I don't even call her, I can't even call you Karen. You've always been my Rabbi Fox. But yes, as you said, Susan, we started as supervisor and supervisee and mentor mentee, and thank goodness evolved into a friendship which continues to enrich who I am and how I operate. So I think Rabbi Fox, if you could share with us How did you consider yourself to be a trailblazing rabbi back when you decided to choose the rabbinate? And tell us a little bit about what it felt to be amongst the first, and what were some of the obstacles, some of the joys. Did you think of yourself as a feminist in that moment? Have you thought of yourself mostly as a feminist? Or, talk to us about that journey and being the first in that, and let us into a bit of how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. And I'm honored, Elissa, to be your mentor. And thank you and Susan for including me. I appreciate it and the moment in light of this morning's inauguration of the president and Madam Vice President. Awesome day. So we're joyful. So when I began, I didn't think about being a trailblazer at all, to tell you the truth. I wanted to be a rabbi. I wanted to be a rabbi because I worked at Camp Swig, and I met rabbis who were having a wonderful time becoming rabbis. I worked at Camp Hess Kramer, and I saw rabbis doing and loving what they did. I mean, I was a junior counselor in 1968 at Camp Hess Kramer when Steve Brewer was the director. And at that point, I had no idea that I wanted to do this, but I loved camp. And I felt a very comfortable Jewish place there. And I think that's part of it, that I wanted to proceed in the Jewish world. My parents, my mother were immigrants and survivor. And my mother was from Dortmund, Germany, and my dad from Vienna, Austria. And they met at the LA Jewish Hiking Club. So, and when my mom first came to Los Angeles, they went to the Wilshire Temple. And it was a really big deal because Wilshire Boulevard Temple did not charge the new Americans dues. They were welcomed. And those stories were part of my story. And my story was also of Jews reclaiming who we are in a land that welcomed immigrants and welcomed Jewish immigrants. And I think that is part of my message. My mentor, Tantalata, studied at the Sorbonne in the 1920s, got her PhD there, worked in Berlin, and was in concentration camp, and then actually survived and went to St. Louis, where she became a psychologist and a professor at Washington University. So Lotta was really my mentor. And she used to say, if I can do it, you can do it. If there's an opportunity, do it. If the sun is up, go there. And I feel that energy from her in dark times. So when I began as a rabbi, I didn't think of myself as a trailblazer in this way. I came from some other women that were already academics and leaders in Germany. My other tante was a social worker. My grandmother wanted to be a doctor, but couldn't. My mother didn't have the chance to finish high school until she was here in the United States. But the idea of education and education for women was significant. So when I entered rabbinic school, it was because Rabbi Chaim Asa, my home rabbi from Fullerton, encouraged me to do it. And Rabbi Richard Levy, who had been a wonderful teacher and mentor at UCLA at Hillel, said, when I asked him, I'm thinking of going to rabbinic school, and he said, do it. It's so much fun. And he approached Jewish learning and living with tremendous joy. And both of them encouraged me. And I think then when I applied to school, and there were 4 women in our class, initially 5, but 4 who were ordained, we became a close circle. And we were actually a group of 4 who became the 4th women rabbis and have maintained a closeness throughout our career. So I think one of the things about being a trailblazer, if you will, is to have friends, that you're not alone.
Question, did your fellow male rabbinical students and the faculty treat you?
Well, the fellow students were actually quite collaborative, and I had study partners that were men or people struggling. The issue was much more professors who were probably in shock. First of all, that there was 4 of us. That was like, oh my God, 2 in New York, 2 in LA, in student and in classes. And that was already a difference, meaning, from the basics of where are the lavatories, to when I went to Israel and I was assigned to a dorm, they assigned me in 1973 to the dorm, which was a male dorm. And I got there and said, oh no, this won't work. And one of my classmates helped me find a friend of his who was studying at Hebrew U that year, and she and I became roommates. There were professors who were not interested in women entering the rabbinate. Certainly, I can say with candor, he was an excellent teacher, but quite misogynistic. Dr. Stephen Pasnamanik was not friendly to women and made it uncomfortable in a variety of ways. I think there were a few other professors along the way, but it was a matter of culture shock. And I think women were entering law school and medical school at the same time, and the other graduate schools were going through this shift having to do with cultural shift and women's inclusion. And the questions raised in a text of the gender defining text that is Jewish tradition. How do you amplify and even question the female inclusion in those moments? That was part of my study experience. My thesis was on women as witnesses in Jewish law. I'm very grateful to Rabbi Michael Chernick, who was an Orthodox rabbi and later became, he's a professor at HUC in New York, who really mentored me, and we worked through these difficult texts. And he was very encouraging. And there were other people in New York, Norman Cohen, and Dr. Borowitz in his challenges was encouraging to use intellect and to be able to pursue deep theological questions. And that interested me. So the entrance into rabbinic school was a culture shock, particularly for the older rabbis. Dr. Atlas taught commentaries in New York, and he looked at our class and he kind of said, well, if those boys can be rabbis, you girl can be rabbi too, because we were all non-Orthodox. And it was different than the European Orthodox world he came in from. So I think HUC gave us the start and opened the doors. When I began at the UAHC at the time, which is now the URJ, Union of Reform Judaism. And it's clear I was hired because I was a woman. They had usually men who became assistant or regional directors had already had congregational experience.
I have a question, and it's for both of you. So you both had pulpits as students, as women. So I would like to hear from both of you what it was like to be a woman pulpit rabbi as a student rabbi in your congregations, compared between Karen's experience and Elisa's experience.
Well, I'll just come out and say that I, because of my own personal Jewish practice at the time, I actually never had a student pulpit, because even though I grew up in the motherland, Cincinnati, Ohio, with Rabbi Gary Zola as, one of the rabbis who used to dress up as Stephen S. Wise and come out from behind the pulpit at Plum Street Temple, and all these rabbinical students were our Sunday school teachers. I never really had this yearning like Rabbi Fox did of, I want to be a rabbi, I want to be a rabbi, for my journey was more spiritual and academic in nature because I went to a very small college in the middle of Ohio, the College of Worcester. Shout out for Worcester Presbyterian School, where I was one of 68 Jewish students out of about 1,900. And because Judaism and Hebrew were, I think it was a course or a part of a course, I ended up taking survey classes in religion. So I studied Hinduism and Islam and Buddhism and Christianity. And of course, a part of those classes was about Judaism. And I was the expert Jew in the room. So I always was the one to talk about Judaism. It's there in Worcester that I discovered Judith Plaskow and standing again at Sinai, and really went through an adult rebirth of what I imagined my Judaism to be, having grown up in a very Reformed congregation and Camp Gucci in Zionsville, Indiana. I didn't really know of anything but Reformed Judaism, and my own personal exploration with halakha, living in India a couple times, working with Mother Teresa. It was there that I said, okay, all of this wisdom that I'm seeing in the quotes of Isaiah on the walls of the ashram and in different places, this is a sign that you don't have to become a Jew to connect with your Judaism. And it was in those moments that I became very serious about my halachic choices. And so as a student, I was never able to take a pulpit. There was no pulpit that could accommodate walking to the pulpit, right? They just were not set up that way, and wherever the pulpits were, or kashrut for that matter. And so I found more local opportunities at Sisa and Hillel and all of those places. But certainly in my class, my classmates were posted all over this region in pulpits. And I think that by the time we got there, and it was approximately one quarter to a half of our students. We were not necessarily counting men and women, right? We were comparing ourselves between those that were first career, second career, those that were under 30, over 50, and those that had children our age that we were students with. All these different categories. Wow. It was an open arena in a different way.
Interesting.
Wow. And that was really quite different in that most people in my class in 1970, when we began in 73 and lived in Israel during the 73 war, most of us were single. There were a couple that were couples. There was only one of my classmates who had children. And I do think being in Israel during that time, during the 73 war, kind of amplified our commitment to Israel and the notion of how vulnerable Israel could be. And that became part of my identity as a young rabbi, that the fact that I was a child of refugee survivors, and I could see the vulnerability of the Jewish nation in my own lifetime was unnerving and amplified my commitment to be involved in Israel in different ways. In full candor, I also have a brother who's a rabbi, some of you know. Steve is younger than me, although he doesn't look it anymore. And so Steve became a rabbi 2 years after I did. And he went to Cincinnati, I went to New York. And
did he have an easy, were you becoming a pulpit rabbi as one of the first women? I mean, for Steve, they just moved him into a pulpit, I imagine, after he graduated. Was it hard for you to find a pulpit as a woman rabbi? I mean, how did you get to Wilshire Boulevard Temple?
Oh, that's
what
great.
was it like? Yeah.
First of all, I did have a pulpit and several pulpits when I was a student in Buffalo, New York. Because they called themselves Congregation Chavurah, they were very open to my leadership as a woman, and the fact that my Hebrew was good mattered to them. They were sort of a mix of conservative and reform, and they were politically engaged, and so was I, and that was a nice match for several years. I landed up being there in the blizzard of 76, where the snow went up to the freeways, and after that I said, wherever I go, it's going to be California. So part of that was how I got to LA or returned to LA. As I said, I worked for the URJ, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations at the time, and Rabbi Fields had been in Princeton, New Jersey. So I met him there as part of the New Jersey Association of Reform Rabbis, and we knew each other sort of in passing. When I came to LA, which I did somewhere there, I got married, 1980. I met Mickey, my husband, who came from a traditional background. And we had to also work out, what does it mean to have a home that is a Jewish home and still be observant while I take on pulpit responsibility and figure out what that was. I wanted to return to LA, and soon after Avi, our oldest son, was born in 1982, Mickey got transferred to LA by ADP. And we moved to an apartment on 6th Street, and it was walking distance to a lot of different communities and driving distance to a number of communities. And I have always felt like I grew up as a Reformed Jew. My mother was a Reformed Jew, a liberal Jew in Germany. So I felt very comfortable with those practices. And when I actually interviewed for Wilshire Boulevard Temple when I was about a gajillion months pregnant. I think I was 7 months pregnant with Benji. And then at my first meeting after Benji was born, I squished myself into this proper suit and met at the Hillcrest Country Club for my final interview. And Rochelle Ginsburg was there, and a number of other people. She stands out because she was, I think she may have been the only woman on the committee. And in terms of change at Wilshire, I came as an assistant young rabbi. So part of me being on the pulpit was a symbol of change from the minute I stood there. In terms of the transference from the congregation, they were no longer looking at a man on the pulpit, they were looking at a woman, and whatever experience in terms of leadership or relationship or kindness or help that they might perceive from a woman might be transferred to me as a rabbi. In those days, one of the wonderful things that Rabbi Fields did was really, we began to wear kippot and talitot, and that was an important thing. I wore them just like my colleagues. It wasn't a question. When I was assigned a funeral, he was really quite wonderful in saying, this is the rabbi who's doing the funeral with you. Because there were times when families would say, oh, no, no. And he would say, this is the rabbi who's going to be with you. And so there was resistance. I think at camp, there was a little bit resistance, but that was different. And there I was much more visible in that I came with my family. And at that point, it was two kids under 3. And I moved as camp director with my giant computer, my 2 little children, and my housekeeper, because I needed somebody to help take care of the kids when I was working. And that was like, what? She's bringing the entourage? Where do we put all these people? Because camp was not set up for childcare at that point. And that was something that, that was a real issue. And I think that through my balance in the first years of about most of my time being in camp, and when I was during the year, I was about 2/3 time, and I was on the pulpit on a rotating basis twice a month. That was great. I think it was great for me in allowing a Shabbat and home life with my kids, and also for the synagogue to get used to me as things expanded and my portfolio expanded over the years. And I think there was a sense of getting used to the female rabbi over time and through relationship. By the time I met adults sometimes. I'd been with their kids at camp. I may have married their 20-year-olds. I may have been assigned to bury their grandparents. And so that was a developing of relationship. And I think the relationships grew deeper as I did different support groups and facilitate those myself, and began to really know people in depth, and also teaching. I love to teach. I love to study Torah, and studying Torah study or teaching Torah study on Shabbat morning was a real pleasure. And it was also interesting because I would meet the very old and some of the people coming through, and in terms of their families' b'nai mitzvah. And that was a relational way of acknowledging a woman's role in the world as rabbi.
Lisa, do you have any
Amazing. I was wondering, Susan, you want, good?
I was going to say, Elisa, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I do. And I just think it's, and my path and Rabbi Fox's path have a lot of, similarities, in that when I first started, I also was assigned to camp. And it's interesting also that I think it's interesting that when I started, it was right as the Irmis campus had opened up, right? And this is something that was very new for Wilshire Boulevard Temple, was having this other, then it seemed like an outpost, now it's in the middle of the city, an additional campus that was really focused on education and families. And a part of what I was privileged to grow was the day school, which now is one in its 22nd year, and Issa is actually celebrating its 10th year. But also, I think, Karen, that it was at a point when your responsibilities within our clergy team were also shifting. And I recall that one of the pieces of wisdom and guidance, and perhaps this was the point when you became my mentor, and I imagine, sitting at your feet, is that you always encouraged me and all the rabbis for that matter to take care of our spiritual selves. You had gotten to a point where you were starting to do some of your own spiritual work. You were the only one, and sorry, we almost used to make fun of you a little bit, that you would go to these 5-day silence retreats, and none of us in the room could imagine being silent for more than an hour, much less for 5 days. So we always said, yes, Karen, you just go right on ahead with that. Let us know how that goes for you, but don't talk. And here I sit all these many years later, having being instructed by you and really guided by you, in that self-care, and that self-care really being taking care of my own learning. You encouraging me to go in the summers to the Hartman Institute, and in my own learning that I would become a better teacher and a better rabbi. So I'm interested in you talking about your own spiritual journey, your development, your wisdom. And later on, I would definitely want to have you share with us what your advice is in 2021, as our country is changing a lot, as we hope to come out of this pandemic. But how is that wisdom of self-care and spirituality helped you, and how can it help others in this time?
Thank you, first of all. I think I wanted to approach the Spirituality Institute, and I was invited in by my study partner, Rabbi Cheryl Lewert, Zichrona Livracha. When she started at IJS, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, she needed a partner who was not part of the program. And she and I knew each other through the Board of Rabbis. And we had positions somewhat similar. And we said, okay, let's study once a week. And we began to study at Asakuma, which was this Japanese restaurant at Barrington and Wilshire. And we would get there, they'd say, oh, you study? Go into the party room. So for years, we go into the party room on Tuesday afternoons and have lunch and study. And through that, I began to raise certain issues. But the truth is that my mom was getting sick, that my mother suffered from vascular dementia or Alzheimer's. And I felt a real tremendous strain between my mother's path and trying to be with her and be helpful to her, and my dad helping her, and my own children who are launching into high school and college. And as young men enter adolescence, that, you know, there's that moment of distance from mom and anything that I might think or say. And I think that part of what I really felt at that time was an emptiness, like my jug was empty. And I felt that my study through IJS and through my Torah study with Cheryl Lewart kind of filled me back in. And I felt that Torah study that I had been doing for years didn't get deep enough for me. But when I felt those vulnerable moments of being stretched, the life moments between being a daughter felt very vulnerable, approaching my mother's illness, and the separation and somewhat the loss of my sons as they went off to New York to study and begin that part of their lives. It was, who am I? Who am I? What do I need to sustain myself here in my relationship with my husband, in my relationship with my parents who are getting older, in my role as a rabbi, where I gave, and I do give, my heart and soul. And I felt like what comes back. So our family has been hikers and bikers, and I've always felt that being outside is part of what sustains me, but I really needed more. And the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and its retreats were really the nurturing that allowed me the practice of being a rabbi for over 40 years, because it is a field in which you give out your heart and soul, and it's intellectual and it's political and it's religious and it's challenging. But the question is, where do you get your sustenance? And I felt like I needed it from the essence, from the one who is the source of all. And I needed to study deeper texts that would enrich me and feel like I could keep going when the vulnerability was overwhelming.
And what is your recommendation for people at home now in terms of self-care while we're stuck here?
Well, I do think it's mind, body, and soul. I do think studying and being involved in some kind of intellectual pursuit is important for many people. For me, reading, studying, whether I read something in Hebrew or English or psychological, I think it's very important that I'm outside every day, that being in nature, touching plants, seeing and breathing the smell that is the world in the morning. And also body. Taking care of your body is something rabbis don't often consider, but it's a very physical work. You've got to be present and show up and be on time for many, many things in a day. And the physicality of it is also part of it. How do you sleep right and eat right and get outside and exercise so that you have a sense of strength in your core as you reach out to people who are at vulnerable moments in their own time. I think during the pandemic, those three mind, body, soul pieces for me are helpful. I do have the hardest time right now with the soul piece. I like shul where people are with each other. Yeah. And I'm missing going to synagogue and hearing people together and finishing and looking at people that you know and have seen that are there over years as support. So the physicality of a spiritual presence is also something I look forward to in the world that might return soon. I just got my appointment for a COVID vaccine for next week. So
woohoo!
Yay.
Karen, I wanted to ask you also, one of our passions that we have shared and also grown and evolved at Wilshire Boulevard Temple is a commitment to Israel, and definitely a commitment in the day school and also really in the religious school and in all of our educational settings, a commitment to the Hebrew language. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you think Israel and Israel's role has changed, if not at Wilshire, then in the reform movement in general, and where you think we might be going with that.
That is always complicated. And I sort of like to separate the Israeli government from Israel in different ways, in that as Jewish people, like French people, it's important that we have a nation. And like German people and like Italian people, it's important we have a nation. And I think that aspect of Jewish identity is a deep cultural, and for many people, a religious, and other people, a secular commitment to a Jewish nation that's evolving and changing. And the Israel that was, post-founding in 1948 is not the Israel we have today. It's much more complex. Some of the commitments that were made by the early leaders have given rise to a tremendous imbalance of power in the Orthodox community. And that over time, as the reform movement has evolved in Israel, has also said to the reform movement, we have to be on the ground here in Israel. And we have to be saying that there's a spiritual and intellectual component of theological and cultural frameworks of being in the lineage of Reformed Jews that has to be present within the land of Israel as well. So we are very involved. My husband actually is a treasurer on the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. We've both done the bike ride, but Mickey, he's done it many times. I did it one time and survived. But I think the commitment to Israel being a community for Jews and having a progressive voice within it religiously is very important. Without that, I think we lose the generation after ours. And I think the ongoing relationship of the day school to Israel through the relationships through school and families is vital for the continuation of the spiritual and cultural connection that today's Jews can have in America and in Israel. We remind certain Israelis that they're Jewish. They remind us that we have a responsibility for the Jewish people as a nation. And I think it's ongoing, and I do think it's a dance. I think we who are at Wilshire Boulevard Temple we are very lucky people, as Rabbi Leader always says. We have all the benefits. And I think part of that is to give some of the resources we have to Israel and to the Israeli reform movement to help them develop the seminary and those small congregations that are the lifeline in communities like Netanya and Haifa and the outskirts, Givatayim in Tel Aviv, and all those areas that now have Reform synagogues, which means that in those communities, women can participate.
I have one more question before we go to opening it up for people. You both are, it's interesting, you both have traditional observant husbands. You both have sons, actually. And unlike, I think, our male rabbis who have wives who do a lot of the domestic part of the life, keep that life going, I suspect that even though you're a woman rabbi, you're still the mother and the wife. And I'm wondering about that balance between family and being a rabbi, and what are your struggles and how have you managed that? And I'd like to hear from both of you on that.
I mean, I would say that fortunately, Gal and I have a beautiful blended marriage. I came with Ashkenazi background and he came with Sephardic. So our food quotient was upped by like so much in the signing of that ketubah. But Gal is also, it's because of him and my mother-in-law that my Hebrew, that I'm fluent today because I needed to speak to my mother-in-law in Hebrew. Unfortunately, that has a lot to do with my portfolio today. But I would say that that raising my children in my school, right, at Bowerman Elementary School, and in our early childhood centers, and having, the Ima on the Bima, and having our family really within a part of that entire community has been complicated. Fortunately, my kids, and they're probably in a very small group of campers who bring their tefillin to camp. And one of the, small handful of campers and students in the school who are bilingual, that for them, it has allowed them to really stake their own claim in what their Jewish life is and how it will be defined. And I feel that being able to give them the entire breadth of a Jewish exposure and a Jewish education and Jewish tools and skills, fortunately in Los Angeles, furthered by the amazing educators at Pressman and at Milken Community Schools, is that we are raising Jews of the world. And so, the balance of it, I don't think of it as like domestic or not domestic. I think that parenting nowadays is also very different, especially when there are in more homes, both parents working. It's a different balance of how that, shaping of children and raising of families takes place. So for me, really being the blessing of having the camps and the schools as our community has allowed our family commitment to our own Judaism, right? The time that we are not on the Bima and the time that we're not in school, for us to be able to find our authentic Ben-Naim expression of what those holidays look like, but also knowing that our eyes are always towards what the Seder is going to look like at Temple and for the schools, and really having that be a symbiotic relationship, a little bit different from the time that Karen was really in the congregation, and I stand on the shoulders of that greatness and everything that Karen put into place.
Well, part of it is, in order to do that, Mickey and I had a partnership. Some of you know Mickey makes challah. He is the challah maker and is involved in some of the domestic. His business really was involved in the early morning because he always was on New York hours. And I did the morning and he did the afternoon with the kids because that's when I'd be at Temple and working. And for Kabbalat Shabbat, one of the things I made a spiritual practice was to set my Shabbat table on Thursday night, because I felt like I could set that up and have Shabbat be ready in some symbolic way, even though I led tefillah and came home after services, and but we were ready and I still had a hand in it. The other thing I did as a spiritual practice is no matter how many times I lit Kabbalat Shabbat candles at day school, at a religious school event, at the temple. I came home and I lit candles on my own mantle and blessed our kids. And we do that in absentia. And that practice was part of acknowledging that I'm not here for the putting the food on the table necessarily. I may have planned it, organized it, orchestrated it, but did not deliver it. Mickey did, and our housekeeper did. And we really, the way that we did Shabbat was with a lot of help. And the same thing was true with Shabbat day. We would have Shabbat lunch together and then our kids would go do whatever they did. And I think as adults, my kids are both married, thank God, and two wonderful daughters-in-law. during this pandemic time, we watch Avi and Liz and little Izzy, who's 3, light the candles together on Friday nights, which is, 4:00 here. So we can have that Shabbat feel. And Avi is not in the Jewish business. He is involved in computer work, but he does a lot of music in the Jewish community, and he did when he was younger. Benji, on the other hand, and both of them rebelled at different times. Don't let me miss that. In terms of, not wanting to wear their nice wet shirt on Shabbat, on Kabbalat Shabbat, and not wanting to do, but Benji now is also married and the father of 3 children. And he is the choir director at the Stadt Temple, which is the Central Orthodox Synagogue in Vienna. And he has to balance what I balanced in terms of helping his family to get ready for Shabbat. And he is the baker. My boys love to bake like their dad does. So Mickey and Avi and Benji do the baking they're into the sourdough challah. And then Benji may be at Tefillah and then come home just in time for services. And because their kids are young, they may do what we did sometimes, feed the kids first and light the candles and give dessert later, to be able to have the sense of joining together in Shabbat and having that balance of 2 working parents, and how do you both contribute to the development of your children and add different things. And, it's always a balance. And I also think it's, not only because of mothers and sons, but, if I was thinking about it and spending a lot of time, there would be some issues, some work that you can do on mothers and sons. And what does it mean for Jewishly involved mothers? And what does it mean for their sons? How much distance do they need? How much closeness do they want? How do they develop their own path in terms of the commitment to Jewish life over time? And then how do they transmit it to their kids? So my little Viennese, I have a lot of home Shabbat experiences and park Shabbat experiences with the few other Jews that they celebrate Shabbat with. And Izzy can go to not a day school, he goes to JCC in Brooklyn and celebrate Shabbat with a cluster of other people that are committed to the JCC secular kind of Jewish life. I feel like we pour it in and then they have to stir it up themselves and develop it. But in a synagogue, you're so visible. And there are times when my kids were okay with that. And there were many times once they understood it, they were not okay with it. And they sort of, I did my thing. They went, we were committed to having them go to Jewish day school so they would develop their own Jewish life and develop mentors outside the synagogue. And I think that's important for people to have that separation from parents also.
Yes, and that was also, you've definitely taught me that and guided me towards that. And also for me, made it possible at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, where I was afforded the opportunity to have that balance so that I could be mom, Ima, and also be rabbi and have them be in balance in a really remarkable way. Susan, I'm wondering if there are questions from, I always love to see who's out there and to connect. We're people.
Yes, so Hannah, if you can let people in, we can welcome our viewers at this point. If anyone has any questions, can let people
Hi, Ed.
Hannah, are you there?
I'm doing it right now.
Okay, sorry.
It's not instantaneous.
Yeah, I think it is, but
You can't snap your fingers. Well, you can, but it might not happen the way you want it to.
Okay. I know there was a question while we're waiting. Here we go. Oh, yeah, the question was about your brother, Karen, and you answered that about who went first in terms of rabbinical school or whatever. Hi, is there anyone else? I know there are more people.
There were, but I think the moment that you open it up to people that might not want to be on screen, you take a risk sometimes.
No, there's 12, it's 12, so there should be more, but people may not want to turn on their cameras. It says 12, I don't know. Well, Merle and Sue, do you have any questions?
No, I just wanted to say this is wonderful, and it's great to see both Karen and Elissa in it where I don't get to see them that often, to see them in this light.
That's great. Sue, yes?
I second that. I want to tell Elissa, you have the most wonderful smile. Your whole face lights up. I love seeing you smile. And my dear friend Karen, I am so happy to see you. And we need to have our call so you can show us your new apartment. And I'm so happy that I spent this hour with you.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank you both, and thank you. I know there are other people, but they're not choosing to turn on their cameras. So we'll thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Karen, Rabbi Karen Fox, Rabbi Elissa Ben-Naim, for sharing. And it's so interesting to learn. And I think, Elissa, we could have a whole other session with you about Mother Teresa and your time in India.
Absolutely.
I think
We could.
You just threw that out. Like, oh, and when I was with Mother Teresa, and everybody's probably going, wait.
Yeah. So,
Mother who?
I got to work with, we have a couple minutes. I got to work with Mother Teresa before going to rabbinical school. I actually was a Fulbright scholar. And my research was, because I had found a woman that I called my guru, although we were not really in that type of like a deeply spiritual relationship, but my research was on female gurus and the goddess tradition. And so the Fulbright set me up with female gurus all over the country. And I kind of expanded my photo documentary was of women participating in religious ritual. So I spent a month in monsoon season, which was not pleasant, in with the Sisters of Mercy and Mother Teresa. And true story, I was given an audience with her, and I had just made the decision, I think it was right before Passover, that I had deferred Hebrew in college and that I would go back. And yes, I would continue with my rabbinical studies and I would become a rabbi. And when I had an audience with Mother Teresa, I said to her, and I had all these academic questions lined up. It was going to be the best part of my paper that I never wrote. And when I met her, everything melted away. And I just said, am I meant to be a rabbi? And she said, yes, and more. I was like, oh, okay. And she handed me a rosary, and here I am, I don't know, 30-ish years later, still talking about it.
Right. And more, an educator, an amazing.
And more, apropos to today's event, I think that women being open to positive female influences in their lives can be really life altering. So, hopefully our generation, as, Rabbi Leader says, to live as good ancestors, hopefully we're doing our job in making sure that the next generation of rabbis and educators and Jews just have this kind of, post-gendered way of thinking about what the roles are in our community, and that we ultimately are just striving to make the world a better place. So hopefully that will be the fruit
I would say, and that we all take on young mentees. It's life affirming to work with younger people throughout different moments in the lifespan. And I'm grateful to you, Elissa. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would add to what Elissa said about women in Jewish communal service as well. That there's a lot of, everybody needs mentors, and as we get mentored, we need to mentor people.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I get to say, I've now evolved into that. I have my first mentee, who's a rabbinical student here in Los Angeles, Sarah Moody, who is serving our Glazer campus, the Browerman East community. And indeed, it's thrilling and rewarding, and there's such beauty in it. So coming full circle. Rabbi Nanis, thank you so much for asking us to do this
Thank
and
you
for setting it up.
sharing.
And
It was so interesting.
Rabbi
Just say
Nanis,
one quick
thank
thing.
you.
I think this is really wonderful because you get a whole different view of the people that you know you get a complete picture. You find out where they came from, what motivated them, these conversations. I think they're just wonderful and I really look forward to them. Great job, Susan.
Thank you. Great job
Thank
to
you
everyone.
so much.
Bye,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank
Helen.
you.
Oh, bye, Rabbi.
Bye.
Lovely to see you too, as usual.
Take good care.
You too.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Hey, Michael.
Rabbi Fox, congratulations on the new baby.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to meet him
Oh, you will. I know you'll travel as soon as you can.
as soon as we can. Take good care. Be safe.
Thank you. You too. Very safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.